Well, good afternoon to all of you attending this seminar. It is a pleasure from the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among the Peoples to introduce this seminar that we have called Palestine for the Right to Exist. Tomorrow, the 29th, is International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, and we're going to organize political and cultural activities. But today we wanted to start with this seminar, where we are going to have three speakers, academics, activists, thinkers on the Palestinian issue. They want to share their ideas and their reflections and their feelings regarding the Palestinian situation. I wanted to begin with a letter that you should read afterwards, sent by Commander Chavez to the UN General Assembly on September the 17th, 2011. And there he says that letter ratifies the total support of Venezuela to the recognition of the Palestinian people, its right to become a free, sovereign, and independent country. He says, resorting to some of the key issues in this field, when he says that against those who say that what happened to the Palestinian people is not a genocide, he refers to the loose philosopher. It's like the Palestinian people should not exist, but never existed. It's like talking about the ground zero of genocide, to decree that the people has not existed, to deny the right to exist. He denounces the situation in Palestine. And then he says, it hurts and it's indignifying that those who suffered one of the worst genocide in history have become the executioners of the Palestinian people. It hurts that the legacy of Holocaust is Nakba, and it is indignifying that Zionism still resort to the blackmail of anti-Semitism to those who are opposing the violations and crimes. And he mentions Zionism as a racist vision of the world, which is very important, that we need to stress. And it is not a religious conflict, it is a political conflict. And then he says, Palestine will live and overcome. Long live to free Palestine, free and sovereign and independent. This letter was read in 2011 in the UN General Assembly, and we need to review this letter. We're going to start with our first speaker, Jamil Abu Sada, Palestinian. He resides in Spain. All his life he was a public functionary, professor of the Alcalá University, president of the Hispanic and Palestinian community in Spain, member of the board of directors of the General Union of Palestinian Communities in Europe, and is responsible for the relations with the European Parliament. He is a father, grandfather, and olive grower, which is very important. And in the end, we will see something related to the olives. Well, I want to welcome Jamil Abu Sada. Welcome to Venezuela. Welcome to this activity. We are very pleased to have you here with us. So you have the floor. So you can talk about Palestine, past, present, and future. Welcome. Thank you, Guillermo. It is indeed a pleasure to share with you from Spain, and hopefully one day we can be in Venezuela together to feel the warmth of the people. I send greetings very cordially to the Venezuelan people and to the government of President Maduro. What you are suffering, what you are confronting against the actions of the US empire, this is very strong. pretty much the same pressures that we receive in Palestine. Therefore, we are in the same trench, on the same side. We fight together in order to defeat imperialism. Today, I want to talk about the history of Palestine, and I would like to show a map. What we see in green is the historic Palestine. And there we see on the upper side the borders with Syria, Lebanon, and the brown is Jordan, and at the bottom the Dead Sea, and to the left Mediterranean Sea, and at the bottom of the left the Sinai and Saudi Arabia. That's the location of Palestine, a very important geographical location for the US empire and all the imperial powers, because that's an enclave between three components: above Europe, at the bottom Asia, and to the left we see the African side. It is a very important hinge, an enclave to reach the three continents, to have an influence on these regions. Here we see Palestine located among these neighboring countries. At the core, as I said, the Jordan River, Syria, Jordan, and to the west, the Mediterranean. Here we have a global view. We see the enclave between the three continents, in the middle Palestine, and to the right we see Asia, at the top Europe, and at the bottom to the left Africa. So the access of Palestine to this continent is very important. Palestine has 27,000 square kilometers from the Jordan River up until the Mediterranean, and from north to south. And this surface, out of this surface, Palestinian rule 22% of this territory. What we see here in blue, according to the British mandate, when it was occupying Palestine between 1922 and 1948, it corresponds to Palestine at that time. But the historical Palestine plus the Jordan section and small territory belonging to Syria, that was for them Palestine. And Zionists trying to claim and vindicate Palestine with that surface, and not only the historical Palestine. Here we see the Zionist terrorist organization when they invaded Palestine. Irgun, Leji, Haganah, they conducted terrorist attacks to scare people, to expel them. Zionism, international Zionism, they wanted to have an empty territory. Therefore, they tried to terrorize and do ethnic cleansing in order to expel Palestinians and then to keep the territory. Here we have the map. That was their aspiration. And they wanted to control that surface that I mentioned, as the Palestine of the British Mandate. So, regarding the ethnic cleansing, they have not spared no effort in conducting this cleansing, ethnic cleansing, and as a result of the terrorist attacks in 1948, they expelled more than 800,000 Palestinians. That's the number of refugees that we find in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, in the West Bank, also in Iran, Iraq, as a result of the aggression of the Zionists against the Palestinian population. And at that time, in 1948, they have raised more than 500 small towns. And today we are trying to rescue the names of those towns and villages. The map that I've sent you this morning, there we can locate those towns that have been demolished, the former names and the settlements that the Zionists have built above these towns, on top of these towns. They want to change the structure of the territory. They try to demolish the architecture, the Palestinian architecture, and replace it with the European architecture to change the image. So it looks as a European country. Because the purpose, the project of Israel in Palestine is a European project. Remember the famous summit of Henry Campbell, the Prime Minister of England in 1907. Well, he summoned 7 countries to discuss this project: Great Britain, France, Holland, Portugal, Spain, Italy. The idea was to study the distribution of the influences in the Near East. The project of Zionism is not recent. It dates back in 1914, when the Ottoman Empire was occupying the Near East. The Allies, Great Britain, France, and their allies, they wanted to defeat the Ottoman Empire in order to increase their influence in the region. Why? Well, because the Near East, this Arab region, is rich in minerals, oil, in fertile lands, and also it has a very important role, because they speak the same language, the same customs, same religion, same geography. They are not natural borders. It is a single nation, basically. So they considered that as long as they are united, they could tap the resources of the region. The initial project, therefore, was to try to sap the strength that they had on the other side of the Mediterranean. And they have then decided to organize this summit in order to distribute their influence in the region. And as a result, they have distributed the influence. We have Syria, Lebanon, the north of Africa, given to France, Italy with Libya, and the rest, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, and the Gulf countries, they were given to Great Britain. So in the First World War, they promised freedom to the Arabs, but the independence didn't arrive once the Ottoman Empire was defeated. They were tricked, they were fooled. They did not fulfill the promise with the Arab leaders. So after the First World War, and with the distribution through the Campbell Conference, we had the Sykes Pico of 1916 to reconfirm the agreement of the distribution among themselves of this territory. And then in 1917, with the Balfour Declaration occurred, according to which it was possible to create a national homeland for the Jews. This was the payment to the Jewish community and the Zionism that helped them during the war. It was the compensation. And as a gift, they promised to give that piece of land for them to create the national Jewish homeland. Now, we know that at that time, there was a persecution of the Jews in Europe. So they decided to send the Jewish people to Palestine, and at the same time, will constitute a barrier between the Arab world and us. And that's the role of Israel today, with all its potential, doing the bidding of Europe and the US. On November the 29th, it is a date, and some people do not know why. It was declared by the UN General Assembly as the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. Why? Why that day? Well, because on November the 29th, 1947, the General Assembly of the UN approved the resolution 181, or what we call the Petition of Palestine, in two states, Israel and one for Palestine, for the Palestinian, and Jerusalem under international tutelage. Israel received of the Palestinian territory, they received 56% of that territory, and they gave 44% to the Palestinian state. But Israel was not happy with that surface of 56%. They want to have more, because their objective is to have the whole territory for them. Therefore, they launched this war against the Palestinian population and the confiscation of more territory, and today they only have the West Bank and Gaza in the hands of the Arabs, under the Egyptian tutelage in the case of Gaza, in the case of the West Bank under the Jordanian tutelage. So the UN considered that they made a mistake in accepting the partition of Palestine, and they tried to compensate this with the symbolic declaration of November the 29th every year of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. And that is why we commemorate this day, and this started in 1978 because it was declared in December 1977. So that is the background and the origin of this commemoration on November the 29th. As a result of this partition, as we can see here, everything that is in green was given to Israel initially, and then in brown or orange was given to the Palestinian state. But at the top, in the Sinai, it has been annexed to Israel, and now they only have the West Bank and Gaza today as separated entities. We see the evolution of the various confiscation, occupations by Israel, supported by international Zionism and the US empire. So in the first map, at that time, there were just scattered Jewish settlements. And then, progressively, the partition map, and then the Six-Day War, where they occupied almost all of Palestine, plus the West Bank and Gaza, and they continue confiscating the rest of the territory, saying that it was because of security reasons. They occupied territory and seized land on a continuous basis. So only 22% of the total territory is in the hands of the Palestinian state. In June, before the elections in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, the extreme right leader, one of the war criminals, he promised the settlers, which is the electoral base of Netanyahu, to annex the Jordan Valley, which is 30% of the Palestinian surface. And it is the east border of Palestine. If it is annexed, then that border will practically disappear. And 60% of the agricultural production of Palestine stems from that territory. In case it is annexed, the Palestinian population then will lose that important resource. And 50% of the fertile surfaces for crops are found in the Valley Jordan, and the salt required for daily consumption is found in the Dead Sea. In case of an annexation, well, they have postponed the annexation in order to calm down the outrage of the international community. But the plan is to annex beyond the Jordan River. What they want is to occupy the whole of the West Bank. And it's just for you to see the activities of the Israeli occupier. To go from one city to the next, from Nablus to the north of the West Bank to Ramallah, which is the administrative capital of the National Palestinian Authority, you have to go through various checkpoints. If the soldier there doesn't want you to pass, well, you won't. The order is to stop any passage. So we are always under the whim of the soldiers occupying the checkpoint for you to be able to go from one point to the other. So the checkpoints, they disturb the daily activities. So many checkpoints are closed. So it is impossible for cars to go from one city to the other, or to reach a hospital or a university or go to school. It breaks your daily life. It upsets your daily life. And these checkpoints exist all over in the West Bank. And the purpose is to outrage, scare people. So the colonies next to the checkpoints, they are built on the hills surrounding the small Palestinian villages, so they can control militarily these towns. These people are heavily armed, and they can control and kill the Palestinians whenever they want, especially in Nablus. The settlers, they go to the farms, to the olive trees, fields, to cut the trees and to burn the trees. This has been denounced because this affects the daily life and the livelihood of the Palestinian people. Well, this is just an example of the many incidents that occur of collective assassinations and attacks against the Palestinian population. I want to give a general overview of the population in the Palestinian people in 2016. We have 12,349,000 Palestinians around the world. In the last statistics, there are more Palestinians within than without. And they are distributed, as we see here, in the West Bank, 2.8 million people. In the Gaza Strip, 1.8 million. In the occupied Palestine, within Israel, 1.6 million. Goes to 20% of the Israeli population. That is within Palestine. When we talk about Palestine and the Palestinian people, we talk about everything. In West Bank, Gaza, living in Israel, in the refugee camps, in the diaspora in Europe, Latin America, North America. Those are the Palestinian people. Well, I've tried to use key words on ethnic cleansing. I've discussed this, the terrorist attacks, the killings, collective and collective assassinations, the felling of the trees. This is part of the ethnic cleansing, the destruction of the houses, with the purpose of expelling 800,000 people who are today the refugees. The occupation, the movement of the Palestinian people. Well, they're trying to prevent the free movement and to hamper this free movement and attack the population in various ways. They, for instance, arrive, they say they are looking for a terrorist. For us, it is a fighter against the occupation. They go to their homes at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the idea is to upset the life of the families and the peoples in their villages. Those are permanent attacks. And today, every single day, there are detentions and assassinations. And regarding detentions, there are close to 5,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons, or others in administrative detention. What does it mean? Well, without charges, without trial, they are detained for limitless periods of time, normally 6 months. This happened with Maher el-Lahar, who has been freed today, a 49-year-old man. They accused him of being part of the Jihad Islamic, and he has been detained since June up until today. And based on this idea of administrative detention, after a hunger strike, he has been freed, and today he is with his family in Guinea. This is just an example of the terrorist attacks against the population. Here we have this toddler, Dabashi, as a result of an attack of a settler in a town next to Nablus. Well, they burnt a house, and here's the image of the room, the bedroom burnt. The toddler was burned to death, and the parents died some time after. They only have a boy left alive with some relatives. But these are terrorist attacks, Zionist attacks by the settlers. Here, another attack similar that occurred a few years back. The father with the son, Mohammed, taking refuge, protection, and there was an attack and a crossfire between Israeli and the Palestinian, and an Israeli soldier murdered parent, the father and son. Both were murdered. And here, to the left, the assassin of the toddler that was burned to death. He was detained for a week, and then he was freed. And if I'm not mistaken, he was decorated because of his attack against the Palestinian population. They then foment terrorism against the Palestinian population. And to the right, it's like an atomic bomb. It's one of the attacks against the Gaza Strip that has been the victim of many wars since 2014, where there have been many dead, many casualties, 1,400 assassinations and more than 22,000 injured, and destruction of more than 50,000 housing units, and destruction and in other areas of the cities. Here, some Israeli soldiers searching in a house, always armed, heavily armed, and then the children just showed the Palestinian flag, and the message is, this is our home and you continue aggressing us. And to the right, the similarities between the attitudes of the Israeli soldiers and the U.S. police force, how they killed, as George Floyd was killed, a child was murdered by a soldier, Israeli soldier, in the street, kneeling on the neck of the child. Before talking about daily things, nice things, like our food, typical food, I would like to first talk about the settlements. We have 600,000 settlers in Palestine, and we have the hills from which they dominate the Palestinian towns. In 2016, there was a UN resolution of the Security Council, the resolution 2334, approved by all the Security Council members and only the abstention of the US without any vote against. Well, in that resolution, they state that all the Israeli settlements in the Palestinian occupied territories are illegal. Therefore, despite this, the settlers continue to increase the settlements. They have just approved the enlargement and construction of more than 1,200 new housing units. And despite the United Nations resolution, they continue going against the international law, human rights, because that is a flagrant violation of human rights against the Palestinian people. Everything they do there is a violation of human rights. As Jerusalem, they say it is a disputed city. It's not. Jerusalem is a Palestinian occupied territory. It was occupied in 1967. Therefore, Israel has no right to annex Jerusalem. But because of the force and discrimination against the Palestinian people, they are changing Jerusalem. They're increasing their might there. They have, in 1980, they attempted through a law passed by the Knesset, they said that the unified Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel, and as a response to that law, The Security Council of the UN passed two resolutions, 476 and 478, condemning and rejecting that Israeli law, and they consider Jerusalem as a Palestinian occupied territory, and they call upon all the diplomatic nations to leave Jerusalem and to go to Tel Aviv or the suburbs of Tel Aviv. So the attempt to annex Jerusalem is, again, an infringement of international law and against human rights. Therefore, we always express our rejection against the Israeli actions in this regard. Well, here we have to the left the famous hummus. Israel lately is advertising this as a typical Israeli food. That's not true. That is a typical Palestinian dish. And to the right, it's a dessert, very typical dessert of the Palestinian people. So not only they expelled us from our territory, that now they want to take hold of our heritage, of our cultural heritage, our legacy. And they're trying even to use the tissue of our traditional symbols and say that those symbols are Israeli. So they are trying to falsify history and to falsify everything in order to attain their objectives. However, the Palestinian people are there. Palestine exists. Palestine will continue to exist. The populations or the towns that like Haifa, Acre, Jaffa, Nazareth, those are Palestinian towns since millennia. They do not have 71 years old like the creation of the state of Israel. They exist for millennia. They are trying to change the structure, the history, to say that those are Israeli towns and cities. I would like to insist that the conflict between Palestine and Israel is not a religious conflict at all. It is a political conflict. Palestinians are against the political movement, the Zionist movement, which is not because they are Jewish. We have Christian Zionists or Christian Muslims in the famous agreements, peace agreements. They are Zionist, not necessarily Jewish. So the conflict is a political conflict. It is not a Jewish, it is not against the Jewish religion. Jewish people, European, non-European, they are fighting with us against international Zionism, against those who try to blackmail, saying if you attack Zionism, then it means that you are anti-Semitic. That is totally false. But they use the political and military power. They're trying to falsify history and to convince people in this manner. Now, I insist, the Palestinian people is there, it exists, and will continue to exist. The conflict is a political conflict, it's not a religious conflict. And there are Jews in the Palestinian leadership, and we coexist in a harmonious way with the Jewish population. So we have no religious problem with them. Well, this is it. We still need time if we want to elaborate further on this topic. However, I hope that this message, I do not know if my message has reached you well, but I hope that in the future there will be more communication and meetings in order to elaborate further on this topic. I would like to mention, if you allow me, I would like to talk about the BDS. It is a non-violent movement. It is non-violent movement of resistance against the occupier. It means boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions to Israel. And the idea is to persecute those who violate human rights and international law in a peaceful and silent manner. So we support, I endorse this movement because it goes against Zionism. It doesn't go against the Jewish people. It is a path of resistance against the occupier within and without Palestine in order to boycott any company or product manufactured in the illegal settlements in Palestine, any product manufactured by a company that does not respect human rights. Well, I call upon Venezuela and the whole of Latin America to continue supporting BDS. And to conclude, our claim is to put an end to the occupation of Palestine, the return of the Palestinian refugees back to Palestine, the respect of international law, the respect of human rights, to dismantle the settlements since they violate international law. Therefore, this is what I had to say. Thank you so much and see you soon. Well, thank you very much, Jamil. This is a great beginning to our seminar because we want to put in a context the existence of Palestine and the meaning of Israel in that territory to counteract the history of people without land, to justify the occupation of a territory where there is already a people, there is a culture, where there is a gastronomy, as you demonstrated with very pleasant images. So thank you so much. Everything you said was extremely important. So all of us understand what are we talking about, where is that people, and the suffering of these people in the hands of a racist, Eurocentric, and Zionist policy, which is the tool of the interest of the empire to preserve the control over a region which is very strategic because of the borders with Asia, Africa, and Europe. Thank you so much. Before giving the floor to the next speaker, we have a video sent by Jamil. So you see another side of this issue of the meaning of Palestine and the houses, and it is a culture, it is a gastronomy that some have tried to invisibilize because of the Zionist propaganda that has dominated the history of the world. So, Jamil, thank you very much again. On behalf of the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among the Peoples. As you said, we are in the same trench. We have a common enemy. We are resisting, and we are optimistic. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been indeed a pleasure. Hi, good afternoon. I wanted to take this opportunity to just to show you the olives and the collection of olives and the importance of the olive tree to the Palestinian people. This is my home. I have a few olive trees. This is just for fun that we have these trees, and then to collect, harvest a few olives that we can have at home. So these olives, these olive trees, are very important for the Palestinian people because they derive most of them derive the livelihood from these olive groves. They sell the olives, or they manufacture olive oil from these olive groves for the consumption of the whole year. Regrettably, over the last years, the settlers are attacking these olive groves, sometimes to steal the fruit, and sometimes, which is even worse, to fell all the olive trees. This is again a new aggression against the Palestinian people because if we remove their livelihood, well, you are killing them slowly. Again, I want to denounce the continuous aggressions of the Israeli settlers against the Palestinian people. And we cherish these trees and the importance for the Palestinian people to derive the oil that we need.
All right, well, I'm changing to English now to introduce our second speaker of the day. We are very, very pleased to welcome here Dr. Hatem Bazian. He's a lecturer in the Department of Near Eastern and Asian American and National Diaspora Studies at University of California in Berkeley. He teaches courses in Islamic law and society, Islam in America, Islamophobia, and other courses like those. He's founder of the American Muslim for Palestine and author of the book Palestine, It Is Something Colonial. Dr. Bazian will talk to us, will share his thoughts to us on settler colonialism in Palestine in the age of neoliberalism. So welcome, Dr. Bazian, to Venezuela, to this seminar. And on behalf of the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among People, we're very pleased to have you here. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. And for us in here, good afternoon, maybe good morning. It's really a pleasure to be with you at the Simón Bolívar Institute at this particular time. Both difficult time for us in Palestine, but I know also it's difficult time for the development in Venezuela at this time. We're still subject to not only colonialism of the past, but also neoliberal colonialism of the present. The attempt to intervene and really direct the affairs of the global South and the Southern Hemisphere is the predicament that we continue to live with in the present context. Speaking about colonization, settler colonization in Palestine, as well as to take it into the present neoliberal economic model and neoliberal political model, can get us into an understanding of what we are facing. One, we always have to make a distinction between colonization, motherland, and satellite colonies versus settler colonialism, as it relates both to access to land, the rights and the position of the indigenous population that is in that land. So Palestine is facing a settler colonial model, where the settler colonial model of the Zionist process, it is to completely dispossess and to empty the land of its population and to create a state or a settler colonial state on the land and the territory that is claimed. So in this sense, Palestine has been in the rungs of almost over 100 years experiencing the settler colonial project. This settler colonial project begins with Great Britain that adopts the Zionist project in the turn of the 20th century under the rubric of colonizing Palestine and also having a design for the region under what we call the Sykes-Pico agreement. It was a French and a British agreement to split and divvy up the Ottoman territories between them. And it is the Sykes-Pico agreement that incorporates into the planning the Zionist idea of a homeland on top of the Palestinian lands and territories. And so from 1917 until today, Palestine has been experiencing the settler colonial project. When we speak about Zionism, we have to understand that the Zionist movement emerged out of European experience. Europe had an intense Islamophobic, anti-Semitic history, where the Jewish subject was racialized, the setting up of ghettos for the Jewish population so they would not be mixed with other population. And that experience of anti-Semitism gave the idea of that the Jewish population in Europe can't be equal, normal, and enfranchised, and therefore it is to leave Europe by looking for a colony outside of Europe. And in this sense, Theodor Herzl, when he communicated with Cecil Rhodes, he said, "Why do I turn to you in such a matter? Because it is something colonial." So the Zionist attempt to escape anti-Semitism was by means of embracing settler colonialism. So on the one hand, they escaped the oppression in Europe, or attempting to escape the oppression in Europe of anti-Semitism, but it was done by an intent to displace a global South population, the Palestinians, and embedded in Zionism all the Eurocentric racist epistemology of thinking of the indigenous population as being less than human, that there need to be a civilizational project to be undertaken, that we made the desert bloom, so bringing technology and wizardry into it, and more importantly, also using religion to close settler colonialism, which for us in the Western Hemisphere and the global South, the role that Christianity played in relations to colonization is very well established. But Zionism used religion as well to try to say that we are on a God's mission to take back the Holy Land, or take back Palestine as a homeland for the Jews. So they utilize the biblical text as a way to rationalize their settler colonial project. Now, settler colonialism, as our audience possibly would know, usually involves either genocide of the indigenous population or transfer out to empty the land. So for those who followed the apartheid South Africa, recognize that there was a genocide that was committed against the blacks, not only South Africa, but Southern Africa during the period of the Portuguese, the Belgium policy in Southern Africa with King Leopold, but also involved transfer of black populations into black homelands, that in essence emptying the good lands that the white settlers wanted of black population in order to take those lands and then concentrate and transfer black populations out. So genocide, in essence, involves two things. Settler colonialism involved two things, either genocide or transfer. Now, in the case of the United States, which one can argue is the most successful settler colonial project, not to celebrate it, but to actually bring context to it, the indigenous population in the United States was put to genocide, and the remaining population was transferred into what we called Indian reservations. If we think of Palestine in the context of the 20th century, we could say that Palestinians experienced genocide in relations to dismantling their society, destroying over 514 villages, 8 urban centers, and the expulsion of the population from those areas, which creates the refugee problem, or the refugee crisis, that is created as a result of Zionist violence, systematic, deliberate, structured violence that created genocide. And then transfer, which was transferring the Palestinians out, something that the Zionist movement adopted as early as the late 1920s, 1930s, even 20 years prior to the creation of the State of Israel. The World Zionist movement, in terms of the settlers in Palestine as South Palestine, adopted the transfer policy, which means that in order for Zionism to have a successful settler colonial project, it needed to genocide as well as expel the Palestinians out. So those two phenomena, I would say it's normative. There is nothing unique or mysterious about settler colonialism. We see it in the United States. We see it in various parts of the Americas toward the indigenous population. We see it in South Africa. We see it in Australia. We see it in New Zealand. Often those who don't want to deal with history try to make it into this mysterious things that is unknown, that you need to you have a degree, a PhD degree in quantum physics to understand what is taking place. Quantum physics is mysterious and difficult subject, but settler colonialism is actually very easy to understand as it relates to the mechanism and what is being done. So Palestinians experience this process throughout from 1948 and then 1967 also, where in particular the United States embraced Israel at post-1967 more so because Israel defeated some Arab countries that were aligned with the Soviet Union. So Israel, in essence, during the British period, it fitted into settler colonialism and British colonial designs. Post-1967 war, Israel fitted into the Cold War. So it became a very important junior partner in the Cold War on the side of the United States and its allies in the region, in the Arab and the Middle East region, but also globally, because it was seen as a frontline state in confronting socialism, communism, relative to the Cold War, in particular confronting Nasser of Egypt, checking the power of Nasser, as well as other countries in the region. So that can explain the close and intensification of relationship between the United States and Israel during the height of the Cold War. In the Cold War, Israel became an important strategic ally of the United States. And the United States provided Israel with all of its military needs, military hardware, protecting it in the international arena. And Israel's presence in the Middle East kept an eye on the oil resources, in essence, keeping the countries that have massive oil reserves in check, where the oil in the region is actually to serve both the United States economy, but also European industrial economy. So Israel, in essence, became an advanced state, both to confront and to counter socialism, but also to keep an eye on oil resources and guarantee those resources into to be flowing both into the United States, Europe, and their allies. On the other hand, also Israel developed relations, sometimes under the table in secret, with Arab and Muslim countries that were allies with the United States, especially those countries that are functioning in a despotic, dictatorial ways, monarchies that basically owe their existence to colonization, to British colonization, French colonization, as well as US interventions and policies in the region. So that's at least give us an idea of the role that Israel played, especially during the Cold War. It was an advanced military state to be used to advance US strategic interests vis-a-vis communism, socialism, as well as guaranteeing the unfettered access to oil and keeping the oil flowing with manageable prices to the West. Now, the questions about Palestine, settler colonialism in the neoliberal age. I think it's a very important discussions to have in terms of how Palestine and Palestinian struggle gets to be shaped in the contemporary period around neoliberal economics as well as neoliberal politics, where the regional framework in the Middle East, especially post-Cold War, rushed to embrace neoliberalism. Neoliberalism in privatization of resources, privatization of the phone services, privatization of water systems, privatization of airlines, privatization of land, bringing agribusiness in, and bringing in all of the global corporate enterprises to devour economies that, for the most part, were still rudimentary economies that were attending to covering the basic needs of the societies. There was a recipe, again, if you want to be part of the global community, you need to embrace neoliberal economics. On top of the neoliberal economics, you had a very structured militarism that also was sold. So in order to actually push for a massive privatization, you needed to empower the military. So what we see is the regional military infrastructures became also wedded to the neoliberal economics. And it's not surprising that many of the militaries in the region became more incorporated into the training program that is facilitated by the United States in particular, but also Great Britain and France played a role because of their ex-colonial territories, ex-colonial lands. So you have the wedding of economic privatization, economic neoliberal modalities, privatization in mass, also massive export of raw material and import of luxury goods as a way of catering to the taste and interests of the elites in these societies, and also empowering the military with also a sense of constructing militaries that far more answerable to the global north, rather than being actually protecting the sovereignty and interests of the society. And within that structure, you have a whole institution of a regime of torture, a regime of suppression of political dissent, a whole structure of really limiting the scope of democratization across the region. This empowered Israel at the same time, especially as Israel entered into a peace agreement, which is the Oslo Agreement. I don't call it a peace agreement myself. I refer to it as the recolonization process, because it allowed Israel to once again use this agreement under the guise or under the premise of maintaining the structure of colonization, but giving the appearance or the outer appearance that there is some type of political rights that are being accorded to the Palestinians, which was not the case. So that allowed Israel to actually become more integrated into the neoliberal economic and neoliberal political order, guaranteeing not only the Palestinian authorities' political livelihood, but also facilitating its relationship with Egypt, providing security and economic lifeline to Mubarak and now to Sisi, having developed in relations with United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and so on. So Israel becomes really the regional hegemonic power, guaranteeing the neoliberal economic order, guaranteeing the militarism that essentially is shaping the region, and also guaranteeing the political elites who are right now integrated into this neoliberal economic modality that is there. Now, the economic collapse of 2008-2009 really caused a major shock to that free-flowing neoliberal economics, because again, the economic shock that took place resulted in all of a sudden your economy, your politics, your ability to maneuver with international agencies, whether it's the IMF, the World Bank, or the Paris Club or any of the hosts of these international agencies were running into a major crisis as a result of this massive collapse, economic collapse. So one can look at the mobilization that occurred during the period of 2010 all the way to 2015. This is a result of the shock to the system that was unable to really address a massive economic instability, a massive economic losses in a short period of time for economies that just recently went into the neoliberal privatization model. So this gets us into the present context of what is taking place in Palestine, and what is it that we are witnessing in the region. It is clear that there is a process that is underway that is seeing an alliance to be forged between Israel, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, and possibly bringing in Sudan, depending on the development, in such an alliance that will reconfigure that the major threat in the region is Iran, and that this relationship or this alliance that is led by Israel sees that the strategic threat in the region is posed by Iran. And Israel is no longer an enemy or a settler colonial project, but rather a friend of these countries. This is the absurdities that we are seeing. This is the what you call to try to stoke Sunni Shia confrontation and another cycle of war that will make Israel the determining power in the region and shift Palestine into a distant past that is no longer the central issue that is at the hub of the Middle East political order. So Israel is attempting to shield itself from the settler colonial label and the mobilization of solidarity with the Palestinians by integrating itself into or fomenting a Sunni Shia confrontation between the Arab world and Iran. And if that confrontation takes place, then you could actually, Palestine will be completely lost as a cause. And in essence, you no longer see the Arab world putting Palestine on the top of the agenda, but rather the war with Iran or the possible war with Iran will be there. If that takes place, then you actually shape all the regional priorities toward neoliberal economic modality further. You will continue to absorb the oil resources and sell military equipment and hardware for both parties or for the region to actually kill itself into an ongoing, never-ending war, which we're seeing some part of it in Yemen and Libya. But this idea is actually to be almost at a larger scale if it actually comes to pass vis-a-vis the current dynamics. So that's how you explain the close normalization of relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. That relationship is forged as the alliance to counter or to confront Iran. It is nothing other than forging the structure needed for a new cycle of war in the near future. And this also explains the US selling mass weaponry in the region in a place where it's already having so many wars among people. So you're pouring gasoline on an already inflamed region that will prevent its development, that prevent its population from actually seeing their own self-determination, their own political rights, their own justice, freedom, and dignity. So neoliberal economics, in essence, you take the resources of the people, you take, in essence, all of their assets, you guarantee the military is on your side, and you sell them weapons to actually fight their next door neighbor. And in the meantime, they'll wake up without any resources left for them. So Palestine, in essence, is at the crux of the issue, because the Palestinians, not the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian activists are the ones that are pointing out what is taking place. They are actually saying to the Arab and Muslim world that we are experiencing a new colonial project that is masquerading as a war, as an effort to for development. There's an effort to counter terrorism while being terrorized themselves. So in this sense, we are the ones that are speaking to the current dynamics that is unfolding in relations to Palestine on the region. So that's what, for me, in essence, that we are still, it's a settler colonial project that from its inception was to try to take land and resources and expel the population. And today we are still experiencing that dynamic today, being sponsored and supported by the same actors that are intent on using the resources and the future horizon of the population. Lastly, I want to say that when the Great Britain wanted to take the territories in Palestine and the region, it was looking at guaranteeing the access to the Suez Canal and to secure its colonial possession in India and colonial possession in Egypt. That same dynamics today is, in essence, I always refer to it as oil for guns. And these guns are to be used regionally against people, against each other. So you sell your oil, you buy your guns, you kill each other, and you go through a new cycle time and time again. And this is, I think, what we need to understand, the settler colonialism, and the period that we are experiencing, and why Palestine is such a critical piece, because it has a disruptive factor, in essence, because it points to these contradictions and rallying both the regional as well as a global level to understand the dynamics that we are experiencing. So hopefully this at least gave a context of what the Palestinians and what Palestine is experiencing in the age of neoliberalism. And I continue to call for people to continue to support the Palestinian struggle. It is both a local and transnational, because it points at the contradiction to the global political order. Often people ask us, again, both as Palestinians and Muslims, you should stop violence. And I say, well, stop selling us weapons, because you can't be advocating peace while selling massive weaponry. The United States has 55% of the global arms sales. So while they advocate peace, they sell death machines that continue to kill and maim many populations across the globe. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Bazian. Dr. Bazian has given us important key issues to understand or to approach the complexities of the situation in Palestine. I know many people are willing to learn more about that, and Dr. Bazian has given us a history from the beginning of the settlement of colonialism into Palestine, the concept of Zionism, something, a movement coming out of Europe, bringing the whole Eurocentric, modern racist epistemologies of the Europe, and then put us in the context first under the British or French empires, American involvement in the Cold War, the role of Israel as a tool of U.S. interest in the region, neoliberalism and its privatization craziness, and the situation now. This new relation between the Arab monarchies and Israel, the role of Iran. So it has been very, very interesting, and fortunately we will have this recorded for all of you to listen again to what Dr. Bazian has told us today. And of course we keep calling everybody to support Palestinians as a cause of for liberty, for freedom, for for a new world of fairness. And so thank you, Dr. Bazian, very much for your thoughts and your words here.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to visiting in person when things are getting back to normal.
Oh, hopefully. You are certainly invited
Absolutely.
to Venezuela.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, now we have our last speaker for today in this very interesting day we'll have had so far. He is Sandio Hira. He is a pen name for Diu Baboeran. He's a Surinamese, a friend of us, director of the Institute for Scientific Research in The Hague, Netherlands. This is an institute for research into decolonizing the mind. Hira is an economist, graduated at Erasmus University at Rotterdam in Holland, and has written 16 books on different topics, among them on coloniality, history, and decolonizing. Currently secretary of the Decolonial International Network Foundation. He will share his thought, his reflection with us on the anti-imperialism struggle, specifically how the struggle of the Palestine people is part of the general struggle against anti-imperialism. So, Sandio Hira, welcome to Venezuela somehow, and to this talk. And so the floor is yours.
Brother, thank you very much. Thank the Bolivar Institute. Thank the people I met in Venezuela when I was giving the workshop on reparations there. I have pleasant memories of Venezuela. Let me start by pointing out how I regard the struggle in Palestine in relation to the international struggle against imperialism. There, all over the world, there are many struggles going on, like in Venezuela and Bolivia. All over the world, you have anti-imperialist movement. Sometimes some struggles gain a specific value, right? For example, Let's take the Cuban Revolution of 1959. Right? The Cuban Revolution, for the first time in history, broke the almighty power of American imperialism, who thought they could do what they wanted in their backyard, as they call the Caribbean. And the Cuban Revolution survived for so many years, for 60 years or more. And therefore, the Cuban Revolution has a special significance in the worldwide struggle against imperialism. As an example of how in the backyard of the US, people can still fight and maintain their freedom. At one point in time, the struggle of the Vietnamese people against imperialism in the 60s and 70s had a very special meaning. Why? Because the liberation of the Vietnamese people, the second liberation, I'm not even talking about the first one in Dien Bien Phu, where they defeated the French, and they are very proud of it. I was in Vietnam, I think last year it was, and I was in Dien Bien Phu. I wanted to see the place where General Giap defeated the French colonialists, and it's really impressive to see that, and to see all the memories and the museum that deals with it. But in the 60s and the early 70s, the Vietnamese Revolution had the specific importance of a small people bravely resisting hundreds and thousands of American bombs that they were having upon their head. They suffered a lot, and it led to the mobilization of a whole anti-imperialist movement all across the world. Wherever you went, whether it's India or in the United States itself, it generated a whole generation of people who mobilized against imperialism. So there are sometimes struggles that have a special meaning. Let's take South Africa, the apartheid struggle, the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. In South Africa, at one point in time, South Africa became the symbol of the anti-imperialist struggle, the mobilizations all across the world around South Africa, which suffered from apartheid from many centuries. That was the significance of South Africa, was that if you break apartheid in South Africa, you break a big chunk of the power of imperialism. That's why the Cuban help in defeating the South African forces in Angola was instrumental in defeating apartheid in South Africa. Now, it is within this context that I look at the struggle against apartheid in quote-unquote Israel. As the South African struggle against apartheid became a symbol of the struggle against imperialism globally, the struggle against apartheid in Palestine is getting that same significance. The Palestinian people are suffering for decades now since their land has been taken, and they have been brutally expelled from their land. They are oppressed in a horrible way. I visited Palestine, I think it was almost a decade ago, and I was there as part of a consultancy group that worked for the Orient House. And the Orient House was part of Fatah. And after the Oslo Accords, there were consultants from different parts of the world, and I was in a team from Holland that was looking at an economic plan once the two-state solution was realized. Now I'm not really in favor of a two-state solution anymore. There's no viable option given the apartheid hunger of land which the Zionists have taken out. But I experienced firsthand how it was to live under that system. I remember driving a car with a friend of mine through Israeli-occupied mountains. And we were driving, I think, and I just increased the speed, and the friend next to me just panicked. He said, you can't drive that fast because there are snipers on the top of the mountains who can shoot at you. At one point I was in a roadblock, and in my naivety I stepped out of the car, just to talk to Israeli soldiers, hey, what's going on. But the guy held my arm. He said, just stepping out of the car means they can kill you. So that is what the life is of Palestinians, what I saw on the West Bank. And then I went to Gaza. It's a horrible experience. If you go to Gaza, there's a large tract of land where you have to go through, and you come at a checkpoint where they interrogate you. The Palestinians are every day humiliated in their own land. And then when you enter Gaza, it's like you're entering a big prison, because the Israelis, are surrounding Gaza. They occupied Gaza and they were defeated from Gaza, but still they have this blockade on Gaza. So I really feel the pain and the struggle. I can't feel it on a daily basis, and I can't feel it to the extent that they have had it. But I remember when I was there in Palestine, I thought to myself, oh my God, look how the Israeli apartheid system is treating our Palestinian brothers and sisters, old people, young people, infants. It's horrible. But the suffering of the Palestinian people under the last apartheid system in the world is now becoming a symbol of the international struggle against imperialism. It's not just a struggle against imperialism, which you have in Bolivia or everywhere. It is the last vestige of apartheid, and therefore the way we look at this struggle, and if you look at it now in the year 2020, you can think, oh my God, when will this end? But remember, if you were in 1990 in South Africa, you wouldn't think that a few years later the system would fall. So I think we need some imagination in order to understand that this system of apartheid, of injustice, is not sustainable. And if we say sooner or later it will fall, let's try to imagine what it will entail. First of all, the idea that you have a two-state solution is now completely unrealistic. There's no viable state anymore. So that means that apartheid state and the way people are imprisoned in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, that system will sooner or later be solved within Palestine, within what's now the Israeli state, which means that we will have a disintegration of the apartheid state. We don't see it now, right? We don't see it before us. So let's look at how such a disintegration might took place. And there, I think we need to decolonize our mind, because we need to imagine that another world is possible. If we think that this world we live in is the only world we can imagine, if we think that, then indeed you will never be able to change the world we are living in. And I used this example in Venezuela when I was there, and say, if you are living in, let's say, 1550 or 1600 in Mexico, or in somewhere, let's take Mexico, right? If you are living there, a part of the Spanish Empire, and somebody would tell you the Spanish Empire will not exist in 300 years, if you're living there, you can't imagine it. You can't imagine what you see before you, which is the imperial might of Spain. You can't think 300 years later, if you hear the name Spain, you don't think of an imperial power. You just think of a country somewhere in Europe struggling to survive. Now, if I tell you there will be a time when the Israeli state of apartheid will disintegrate and you will get a new state, you can't imagine it. Because we live with the might of Israel, so we can't imagine how will it dissolve. So let's look at history. First, you will see it will dissolve from within. Within the population of Israel, there will be people, good people, who won't accept that in the name of their people, they commit this horrendous crime against humanity. The crime of occupation, the crime of murder, the crime of humiliation, the crime of exploitation. These crimes, which are being committed on a daily basis now, there will be people in Israel. For example, within the army in Israel, which was unthinkable maybe 30 years ago. You see young people who refuse to serve in the army. You will see that across the world in the Jewish communities, there are small groups, but yet 30 years later, there would hardly be any group. There are Jewish people now taking up the issue of the liberation of Palestine. So within the apartheid state, you will see forces that are going to mobilize, as they are doing right now as we speak, against the apartheid state in name of humanity. So that is one thing within the state. Then that state, that apartheid state, is being supported by the mightiest power, which are now mighty, which is Europe and the United States. But we live in an era where we see the decline of the West and the rise of the rest. That is what we are emphasizing now. As we are speaking, we see that. So we see how in the United States, the disintegration is taking place in the United States. In the United States, we have a government, a Trump government, which was 4 years long the most ugly face of racism and backwardness. The government of Biden is the smart face of the same phenomena of imperialism. It's not a different thing, you know. And Obama was the black face of it. See, there are different faces behind the same phenomenon. Now, the decline of the United States and its power sooner or later will affect their support for Israel. So we will see that in the United States, 20 years ago, it was unthinkable that members of Congress would voice support for Palestine in the United States. Now there are members of the Democratic Party who came out of the radical left in the United States who are talking about Palestine. The Black Lives Matter movement and the Black movement in general in the United States has taken up Palestine as an issue. And across the world, we will see that the campaigns which are being waged, like the boycott and disinvestment campaign, the BDS, is taking more and more force in the different part of the world. So internationally, like the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, like the struggle of the Vietnamese, which led to a worldwide mobilization of anti-imperialist forces, Palestine will be such a rallying point for all liberty-loving people of the globe. So the internal factors and the external factors will lead to further weakening the state of Palestine. And let me give you another thing. in Israel, they think they are winning. They think they are winning the struggle. Why? Because they have succeeded in getting openly the support of corrupt Arab nation, Saudi Arabia, the small Arab states. And decades ago, it would be impossible to have established relations with these corrupt governments, because even as they are corrupt now as they were then, they still listen and were sensitive to the sentiments of the Muslims in the world, which obviously are very much against what's happening in Palestine. So the Israelis think they are winning because of this, but in fact they don't understand that they are losing. Why? Look at the so-called Arab Spring, which is called Arab Spring because people came in revolt against dictatorships, and in the Gulf states and in Saudi Arabia, they have a structure of society where a majority of them are laborers, workers from outside. 70% of their population consists of workers who operate the hospitals, the industry, the construction, the airports. All these are not operated by indigenous Saudis or indigenous people from Dubai or whatever. So for now, these societies look stable because these workers have no rights and are not revolting. They come in, they earn a lot of money, leave in a few years' times. But there is repression going on. And these regimes are increasingly vulnerable. And the best example is the strongest among them, which is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia engaged in a war with Yemen. And now Yemen has the ability to attack their oil fields and their airports. So we shouldn't be surprised that at some point in time, these developments will lead to the fall of those states. And when that happens, it will lead to the fall of the apartheid state of Israel, where they need to find a formula to live together in a one state, one pluriversal state in which Jews and Palestinians could live together. That will be a hard bargain for the future because we can't imagine that to be happening. But looking at history, when you have internal factors leading to the decline, external factors leading to the decline, it is possible. It is possible that a regime, even an empire, can succumb, can go down. And I think that is definitely what will happen with Israel sooner or later. We don't know when. And then there's a third factor, an important factor. If you look in the globe, there was a time when the Soviet bloc disintegrated that the liberals across the world thought that they had won. In fact, there's this Japanese American, Fukuyama, who wrote a book called The End of History, where he took this as an example and say, we are now at the end of history, capitalism has survived and won, and this system will be the dominant system all over the world, and every country will move toward that system. Now we are in an era where the decline of the United States is apparent and very clear to be seen. You see the rise of China, you see the strength of Russia, and in the so-called Middle East, in East Asia, it is Iran, which is the most important factor now. Iran had a revolution in 1979. That is what, 40 years ago. And Iran was able to survive for 4 decades, despite a war that was engineered by the United States, supporting Saddam Hussein, a very bloody war where they used chemical weapons to attack Iran. And at that time, the Iranians had no defense industry. Their technology was horrible. They were just in power. They didn't build a strong state. Today, they have a very strong state. They are not dependent on any foreign technology. And they are even able to support anti-imperialist movement across the world, as you know in Venezuela, what the meaning is of the Iranian support. So, looking at how Iran will evolve and the role of Iran in bringing down the Israeli apartheid system, that is something we should pay attention to. Because one thing they used, the imperialists used, was this terrorist group, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Daesh, as they are called there. This group were funded, were organized, were set up by the United States. They established a base in Syria, and they established a base in Iraq. And in Syria, they engaged in a war. They almost succeeded in engaging in removing Assad. But due to Iran, due to the Russians, they were able to come back. They were supported by Turkey because the oil fields which they had captured, the oil were sent through Turkey. They were being sold to Turkey. This was a bloody war. The propaganda in favor of the terrorists didn't mention that they were supported by Israel. The wounded soldiers of ISIS were treated in Israeli hospitals. And the logistic support for them not came only from Turkey, came from the United States, came from Israel. And yet they lost. They didn't manage to capture Syria. In fact, they were driven back. And the General Soleimani, who was murdered by the Americans, he was in Syria. He was advising them how to set up their defense and how to cooperate and putting in the attacks on the terrorists. So that is where we are now. We are in a situation in which, in the mind of those who look from the outside, think that the might of Israel is omnipotent. You can't do anything. They will be there for the next 1,000 years. But if you look at the factors that leads to the downfall of any empire or any oppressive state, like apartheid states, if you look at those factors, we see that there are international and internal factors working against the survival of that state. And then the question will be, how will, once the support internally and externally is getting weaker and weaker for the apartheid state, how might this transition go forward to a democratic, pluriform state in Palestine? It's a matter of imagination. We don't know. We just can imagine, we just can imagine. But imagination brings us to ideas of how we can support the Palestinian people. And by supporting the Palestinian people, we are supporting the anti-imperialist struggle. And by supporting the anti-imperialist struggle, we're supporting ourselves. And I think it's up to the Palestinian to decide, obviously, how this will look like, this transition from an apartheid state to the non-apartheid state. And we will be, listening to their leaders, and they will have their differences of opinion, and they will have their agreements also. And our task is to support their liberation in the way they want it. But I'm confident, and I'm very sure that the lesson that history has taught us is that freedom is possible, another world is possible, a world in which apartheid doesn't exist is possible. And it is up to us to organize the solidarity with the Palestinian people to make this possible. Thank you very much.
Very much, Sandy Hira. He has shared with us interesting thoughts, starting with mentioning Cuban Revolution, Vietnamese struggle as a symbol, as of struggle against the imperial powers, and talking about his own experience in Israel and Gaza, and then this interesting view, positive view, when he he said we couldn't imagine the end of South African apartheid in 1990, and now probably we cannot imagine the end of Israeli apartheid. But the time for Israel apartheid to end is coming. It's coming, and it's coming because Palestinians are resistant people, resilient people. They're struggling, and they have the support of the good people of the world. We are supporting very much this cause, and Sandy Hira view in a positive way this struggle, that it will succeed eventually. And thank you very, very much, Sandy, for your thoughts shared with us. And for the part of the...
For the opportunity.
Thank you. Well, the Institute, Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among People, want to thank our speakers today. It was very, very interesting, very enlightening day. And we will invite you all to connect tomorrow in our channel for a political cultural activity for the Day of Solidarity with Palestinian people. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has supported this cause for years, and all our people are with Palestinian people. So we invite you all to tomorrow for this activity, and thanks very, very much all of you to have attended this activity. Thank you, and until tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.